You know, for the last few days, we've been quite cautious about the death toll. We've said it's been roughly somewhere between 500 and 650. But even today, the regime itself has come out and said it could be several thousand. Could you just talk us through what you're seeing and hearing on the ground in Tehran?
Yalda, as we speak, there are no major protests ongoing in the country, but the discussions are that there might be significant number of casualties during the protests from the both sides, including from the security forces as well as those on the protesters' side. There is no, let's say, a specific or precise number. It seems that investigations are ongoing, but in the meantime, the eyes are on, let's say, the threat coming from the US side, President Trump making remarks regarding Iran, and whether there will be a foreign aggression against the country or not, that's yet at the moment a question. And
we want to get to that in a moment, Mr. Aslani, but I do want to talk about the piles of body bags that we've been seeing outside of hospitals, piled up. Some of these human rights groups that are monitoring the situation inside Iran say that, you know, that live ammunition is being used on these demonstrators. Could you talk us through that point about the live ammunition?
Yalda, you know, the protests originated from the Grand Bazaar here in the capital city, Tehran, and in a number of other towns and cities. And it was mostly peaceful at that moment when it focused on the economic demands. But the initial phase was somehow fizzling out. But the second shock provoked a new round of, let's say, protests. And there were some, let's say, announcements coming from the son of the previous Shah of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who called people to come to the streets, and he, this was kind of, let's say, inciting for more violence. He asked people to, let's say, take over the public buildings.
Just on the point of the live ammunition that's being used on the protesters, could you confirm that? Because the footage that we're seeing coming out, because of course there isn't much footage coming out. There's an internet blackout, although you have connectivity, as does the Supreme Leader. But for the rest of the population, the rest of the 90 million people inside Iran, there is no connectivity. When we are getting some kind of material coming out, we're seeing body bags, we're seeing live ammunition being used against people in the street. We're hearing reports, and we've covered reports here on Sky News as well, of 18-year-olds, teenagers who are being killed by the security forces.
Yalda, the protests were happening mostly in a peaceful manner, but there were some, let's say, protests protesters who engage in, let's say, armed attack against the security forces. They try to attack public buildings or mosques. It's like, setting fire on churches. And we have been hearing that even some security forces have been beheaded or burnt alive, or some medical staff. That's why we were seeing also the response from the security forces, which resulted in a high number of casualties on both sides. And that is what was not, let's say, meant or sought by the Iranian security forces or the government. As I was saying, the initial phase was more peaceful, but in the later stage, which was, the economic demands or protests turned into more,
but live ammunition is being used against unarmed protesters.
But, the Iranian security forces initially, they didn't use live ammunitions, but they faced, armed attack on the security forces, on public buildings being set on fire, or let's say even some horrific scenes happening. They were forced to react. However, it is not good to see that even those protesters are being killed, but we are also hearing from the external, let's say, officials like the American officials or like Reza Pahlavi, calling for those kind of, let's say, violent clashes between security forces and the protests, which resulted in this situation. And the security forces had no choice but to respond to those who were setting fire on those, let's say, even private properties.
So using live ammunition then on unarmed protesters. Can I ask Mr. Aslani about 26-year-old who is being executed tomorrow? His case has been fast-tracked in the last week. He doesn't have access to his lawyers, and it's believed that he will face execution tomorrow.
There have been real protesters, people coming to the streets, chanting slogans against the situation and the problems they have had in their lives. But among them, there have been also cases that the Iranian government has been accusing of, let's say, committing riot and unrest, or some of them have been accused of having linked to foreign, let's say, agencies or, let's say, governments. And this has made situation very difficult, and this violence also sidelines the main protests, those masses who have been protesting against the situation to be sidelined and not to be heard well. And this is the problem, that many people might be unhappy with the situation, but they do not get the chance to somehow speak out and to protest, because this violence, somehow sidelines them, in the longer run.
So how is the regime now dealing with the idea of Donald Trump having military options on the table? Because he warned very clearly that if live ammunition is used against protesters or they are killed, that he would step in. He said that they were ready and loaded. What does the Iranian government, the authorities, think will happen now?
Well, the Iranian government is considering this scenario very seriously, and they think that this threat is serious, and they are prepared to somehow retaliate against any kind of, let's say, attacks against the country. But it seems that, the Trump administration is using this as a kind of pretext in order to initiate another round of attacks against the country, in order to target the military infrastructure, the security let's say, establishment in the country, in order to weaken Iran. And that's why we have been hearing about significant number of casualties. Some of those numbers have been exaggerated. And it seems that it wants to provoke a kind of attack against the country. But also the quality of the impact such kind of, aggression can have in the country is also the matter of question. Some are asking whether this could, let's say, trigger another rally around the flag effect, which happened during the 12-day war. For sure, some, let's say, part of, protesters who have been seeking a violent, let's say, a protest against the government, they might welcome it, but the masses and the majority of the people will not welcome a chaos or unrest, because they think that any foreign aggression or attack can create a, let's say, situation whereby there could be a civil war. And it can also, there is no clear picture that the day after how it will seem, and it seems somehow blank or green. And they are afraid that the day after Israel will attack, different infrastructure in the country, something which has happened in Syria or other countries in the region. And that's why the masses or the average citizens, they do not want to somehow see a foreign aggression coming.
Yeah, we'll have to see, because, of course, as you say, I mean, there are at least 2,000 people who've been reported dead, but we aren't able to access proper information from inside the country because, unlike yourself, the rest of the country don't have access to the internet, and they are relying occasionally on Starlink. Mr. Abbas Aslani, thank you very much for your time.